I have walked beside the Emperor for millennia. I have witnessed the birth of empires and the silence of dying stars. I have stood in the presence of gods and monsters, and I have learned that in this galaxy of endless night, there are fates worse than extinction. I know why the Eldar scream. It was on the world they call Siamhan, during what the High Lords optimistically termed a strategic negotiation, that I first witnessed the precise moment an Eldar soul is claimed by she who thirsts. The delegation had gathered in a dome of wraithbone, that psychoreactive material the Xenos shape with thought and will, beneath the pale light of their dying sun. Autarch Calendris stood before us, resplendent in armor that sang with captured starlight, speaking in that musical tongue that sounds like wind through crystal. Then the assassin struck. Not one of ours. I would have sensed the anathema psychonic conditioning, the null pressure of a codexes, the killing intent of a vindicare. This was something else. A dark Eldar mandrake, shadowborn and warp-twisted, materializing from the space between moments with a blade forged in Kamaraka's slave pits. The Autarch died well by Xenos standards. The blade entered beneath the ribcage, angled upward, precise. Calendris had perhaps 3 heartbeats of life remaining. But what happened in those 3 heartbeats taught me more about damnation than 10,000 years of service to the throne. I saw his soul. Do not mistake me. I am no psyker. The Emperor's alchemy that created the custodians burned such vulnerabilities from our essence. But in that dome of psychically conductive wraithbone, surrounded by Eldar whose minds bleed constantly into the immaterium, even my mundane senses perceived what occurred next. The soul emerged like luminescence from a shattered gem, brilliant, impossibly complex, a thing of crystalline beauty that no human soul could match in its terrible sophistication. For a microsecond it hung there, suspended between materiality and the warp, and in that instant I understood why the Eldar are called the most psychically potent of mortal races. Then she came for it. Not in person, if such a being can be said to have a person, but as an irresistible gravitational pull, a hunger that transcended physics and metaphysics alike. The soul twisted, screaming silently, drawn toward something vast and terrible that pressed against reality's membrane. I saw it elongate, distort, streaming away into the warp like light into a black hole's event horizon. But the Eldar saw more. Every Xenos in that chamber collapsed simultaneously. Some shrieked. Others vomited. 2 died instantly. Their hearts simply stopped, unable to endure the psychic backlash of witnessing their species' ultimate fate. The surviving farcers clawed at their eyes, their helmets' psychic hoods crackling with overloaded protective matrices. The diplomatic mission ended there, of course. In the aftermath, as chapter serfs tended to the traumatized Astartes honor guard and the inquisitorial representative compiled his incident report, I stood alone in my chambers and contemplated what I had witnessed. I had seen demons claim human souls before. I had watched as Khorne's reapers harvested the wrathful, as Nurgle's collectors gathered the despairing, as Tsench's architects plucked the ambitious from the moment of death. But this was different. The human soul, claimed by chaos, typically experiences a moment of transition, an instant where the demon must seize and drag the essence into the warp. There is a transaction, a violence done to the natural order. The universe itself seems to resist, if only for a moment. But with the Eldar soul and Slaanesh, there was no resistance. It was not capture. It was recall, like a breath drawn back into lungs, like water returning to the sea, like a child coming home to a parent who has waited with infinite, terrible patience. This observation troubled me more than the violence, more than the death. I am custodian. We are fashioned to perceive patterns, to understand the mechanisms of power and divinity. And what I had perceived suggested something far more horrifying than simple predation. It suggested ownership. In the weeks that followed, I pursued understanding with the methodical intensity that defines our order. I accessed the Black Library's partial records, those fragments our agents had recovered over millennia. I consulted the preserved testimonies of Craftworld envoys who had spoken before the High Lords. I even reviewed the ravings of human psychers who had brushed against Slaanesh's domain and retained some fragment of sanity. Picture emerged. Not complete, never complete where the ruinous powers are concerned, but sufficient. The Eldar do not simply fear Slaanesh. They are bound to their dark god by chains forged in the moment of her birth, chains that reach backward through time to encompass every Eldar soul that has ever existed or will ever exist. It is not a relationship of predator and prey, but something far more intimate and far more damning. To understand why requires understanding the fall itself, that apocalyptic instant when the Eldar Empire's millennia of decadence and excess birthed a new chaos god from the screaming fundament of the warp. The Eldar were mighty once, not merely powerful but supreme, masters of the galaxy when humanity still dwelt in caves and worshipped the sun. Their empire spanned millions of worlds, their technology indistinguishable from magic, their psychers able to reshape reality with mere thought. They had conquered death itself, transferring their consciousness at will into new bodies, achieving a form of immortality that even the Emperor might have envied. But immortality without purpose breeds corruption. Over tens of thousands of years, the Eldar civilization descended into hedonism so extreme it defies human comprehension. Every pleasure was pursued to its ultimate extreme. Every sensation was amplified beyond endurance. Every taboo was not merely broken but ground into dust and snorted like some obscene narcotic. They called it the path of damnation, though they did not know they named it truly. Murder became art. Torture became philosophy. Entire worlds were dedicated to singular obsessions. Planets where nothing occurred but the refinement of a single perfect scream. Asteroids hollowed out to house machines designed solely to produce unprecedented forms of agony. The Eldar psyche, so brilliant and sensitive, turned its terrible focus inward, pursuing sensation with the same genius that had once built star-spanning empires. And the warp listened. The immaterium is not truly separate from reality. It is reality's reflection, its emotional echo, the place where thought and feeling take on substance and weight. Every sentient mind creates ripples in the warp. Every emotion leaves an imprint. The Eldar, with their psychic potency, created tsunamis. For millennia, their collective psychic emanations accumulated in the warp like poison in a wound. Decadence, cruelty, excess, sensation pursued beyond all reason or restraint. These feelings, these obsessions, they gathered and concentrated, achieving a critical mass of corruption that transcended mere emotion and became something new, something self-aware. The birth scream of Slaanesh tore reality apart. The Eldar Empire died in a single instant, countless billions of souls ripped from their bodies and drawn shrieking into the warp to become the substance of their newborn god. The psychic shockwave created the Eye of Terror, that massive wound in reality where the materium and immaterium bleed together. Entire star systems were consumed. The Eldar, who had numbered in the uncounted trillions, were reduced to scattered remnants. The craft worlds that had fled far enough to escape the initial devastation, and the twisted Drukhari who hid in the webway's darkest corners. But the fall was not the end of the Eldar's torment. It was merely the beginning, because Slaanesh, the Prince of Pleasure, the Dark Prince, she who thirsts, this newborn god was not separate from the Eldar. It was not an external force that happened to prey upon them. Slaanesh is the Eldar. Or rather, Slaanesh is what the Eldar became when their collective soul weight achieved apotheosis in the warp. Every Eldar who participated in the fall, which is to say nearly all of them, contributed psychic essence to the entity that became Slaanesh. Their desires, their cruelties, their pursuit of excess beyond all natural limits. These things were not simply observed by the warp. They were made manifest. They were given form and consciousness and terrible divine power. And because Slaanesh is formed from Eldar souls, because the god is quite literally made of their psychic essence, every Eldar soul belongs to her by right of origin. This is the metaphysical trap from which the Eldar cannot escape. When a human soul is claimed by chaos, it is a theft, a violent appropriation of something that belongs to the natural order of life and death. The universe objects, however faintly. The soul must be seized, bound, dragged into the warp against reality's weak resistance. But when an Eldar dies, there is no theft. There is only return. The soul goes to Slaanesh because it came from Slaanesh. The god reclaims what has always been hers, what was fashioned from the same substance as her own divine essence. It is not predation. It is reabsorption. It is the inevitable return of a fragment to its source. I spoke with a farser once, in the aftermath of a joint operation against a Tyranid splinter fleet. Eldorath Starbane, his name, a being of such ancient power that he claimed to have been born before the fall, to have witnessed the last days of the Eldar Empire with his own eyes. We stood together on the observation deck of an Imperial battleship, watching the Tyranid bioships burn in the void, and I asked him the question that had consumed my thoughts since witnessing Autarch Calendris's death. "Why does your god hate you so?" He was silent for a long moment, his alien features inscrutable behind his rune-marked helm. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of millennia of grief. "She does not hate us, Monkey. That would be more merciful than the truth." "Then what is the truth?" "She loves us," Eldorath said, and his voice cracked with something that might have been laughter or madness or despair. "She loves us as a child loves a favorite toy, as an artist loves their canvas, as a gourmand loves an exquisite meal that must be savored slowly, across eternity, so that every nuance of flavor can be extracted and experienced and treasured." "That is not love," I said. "No," the farcer agreed, "but it is all we have left." He explained then, in terms that even a human, even a custodian, could comprehend. Slaanesh does not simply destroy Eldar souls. Destruction would be mercy. Oblivion would be escape. Instead, she consumes them across an eternity of experience. The Eldar soul, when claimed by Slaanesh, enters the Dark Prince's realm in the warp, that domain of excess and sensation where every pleasure and every pain exists in its most extreme and terrible form. And there, conscious and aware, the soul is subjected to experiences designed specifically to generate the maximum possible intensity of sensation. Because Slaanesh is a god of sensation, of pleasure and pain, ecstasy and agony, all forms of excess and experience taken to their absolute limit. And the Eldar, with their hypersensitive psyches, their capacity to feel and experience on levels no human could survive, are the perfect medium for her divine art. The Torment is not random. It is meticulously crafted, individually tailored to each soul, designed to exploit every psychological vulnerability, every buried trauma, every secret desire and hidden shame. Slaanesh knows her victims intimately. They are, after all, made of the same substance as her own consciousness. She knows what will break them, what will remake them, what will keep them conscious and aware through eternities of suffering that would reduce a human soul to mindless static within seconds. And the torment never ends. A human soul, even one claimed by chaos, typically experiences some form of resolution. The personality dissolves, merging with the demon or the god, losing individual identity in the greater whole of the warp entity. There is an ending, however terrible. But Eldar souls do not dissolve. Their psychic structure is too coherent, too complex, too fundamentally resilient. They retain identity and consciousness even as they are torn apart and reassembled, even as they experience tortures that should annihilate awareness itself. This is the curse of their sophistication. The very psychic potency that made the ancient Eldar mighty now makes their damnation infinite. Eldorath described it to me, not from personal experience, he was careful to note, but from psychic visions, from the death screams of other Eldar that farcers sometimes perceive across the gulf of space and warp. "Imagine," he said, his voice distant, hollow, "that every nerve in your body becomes infinitely sensitive, that every sensation, no matter how minor, registers as overwhelming, consuming, obliterating. A touch becomes a hurricane of input. Pain becomes an entire universe of experiencing. Pleasure becomes indistinguishable from agony because the intensity exceeds any capacity to process it. Now imagine that this state continues forever, not metaphorically forever, but truly eternal, that you remain conscious and aware as centuries pass, millennia, ages beyond counting, that you experience every instant of torment with absolute clarity, that your memory never fades, that you never acclimate or adjust or find relief. And imagine that the one inflicting this upon you knows you more intimately than you know yourself, that she can read every thought before you think it, anticipate every attempt at psychological defense, counter every coping mechanism before it can form, that she loves your suffering not as a sadist loves causing pain, but as an artist loves their masterwork, as a musician loves a perfect note sustained forever. That is what awaits every Eldar who dies without their soul being captured by a spirit stone or protected by some other means. That is the fate we fled from when we abandoned our dying empire. That is why we will commit any atrocity, ally with any force, sacrifice any principle to avoid falling into her grasp. I understood then, not with my emotions, custodians are fashioned to transcend such weaknesses, but with my intellect, my capacity to comprehend the mechanics of horror. The Eldar are not hated by their god. They are treasured. Each soul is a precious resource to be utilized with infinite care and attention. Slaanesh does not waste her victims through careless destruction. She cultivates them, nurtures their capacity for experience, keeps them perpetually aware and responsive across eternity. Because every sensation they experience, every spike of pleasure or wave of agony, feeds back into Slaanesh herself. She is a god of sensation, and the Eldar souls provide her with an endless banquet of experience, an infinite variety of feelings and responses that sustain and empower her divine consciousness. The Eldar created their god through excess. Now they fuel her through eternal suffering. It is a perfect closed loop of damnation, the prey that fashioned its own predator, the victims who ensured their own perpetual torment through the very sins that birthed their destroyer. And there is no escape. The craft-world Eldar understand this with every fiber of their being. It is why they cling to their path system, that rigid psychological discipline designed to prevent the excesses that might draw Slaanesh's attention. It is why they wear spirit stones, those psychoreceptive gems that capture their soul at death, providing a refuge from she who thirsts. It is why they are so utterly ruthless in their pursuit of survival. I have witnessed Eldar sacrifice entire human worlds to save a handful of their own. I have seen them trigger catastrophes that killed billions to avert threats to their craft worlds. I have watched them commit acts of such calculated cruelty that even the Inquisition took pause. And now I understood. When your alternative is infinite conscious torment at the hands of a god who loves you too much to ever let you end, when your damnation is not punishment but eternal consumption, when death is not release but the beginning of true horror, what act would you not commit? What sacrifice would you not make? What evil would you not embrace if it meant even one more day of mortal existence? The Drukhari, the dark Eldar of Kamarak, have chosen a different path to the same end. They feed Slaanesh the souls of other beings, torturing slaves and victims in such numbers and with such exquisite cruelty that the psychic emanations satiate the god's hunger, at least temporarily. They have transformed damnation into fuel, suffering into currency. They perpetuate their own existence by ensuring that Slaanesh feeds on others rather than on them. It is monstrous. It is ingenious. It is desperation refined into a civilization. But even they, with all their dark brilliance, cannot truly escape. They merely delay. Every Drukhari knows that if they pause, if they fail to provide sufficient suffering to their hungry god, she will come for them personally, and their torment will be proportionally increased for having made her wait. There is a certain terrible justice in it, I suppose. The Eldar built an empire on the assumption that they were beyond consequence, that their might and sophistication placed them above the natural laws that govern lesser beings. They pursued pleasure without restraint, believing themselves entitled to every sensation, every experience, every excess their brilliant minds could conceive. And in doing so, they created a god who embodies that philosophy perfectly, a being of infinite appetite and zero restraint, who pursues the sensation of consuming Eldar souls with the same obsessive focus that the ancient Eldar brought to their decadence. They made themselves into the perfect prey, and now they are hunted by a predator of their own design, across a time frame that makes eternity seem brief. I reported my findings to the Captain General, as is protocol. He listened in silence, his ageless face betraying nothing, as I detailed the metaphysical mechanisms of Eldar damnation. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. You understand what this means for the Imperium's relationship with the craft worlds? Yes, my lord. It means we can never truly trust them. Their desperation makes them capable of anything. They will betray any ally, violate any agreement, commit any atrocity if they perceive it as necessary for survival. Correct. But it also means something else. He fixed me with a gaze that held 10,000 years of accumulated wisdom. It means that, in some ways, they are more cursed than even we are. The Emperor endures upon the golden throne, his suffering measured in millennia but finite, purposeful, maintaining the astronomicon that guides humanity through the darkness. But the Eldar? Their torment is infinite and meaningless. Punishment for sins they committed before most of them were even born, inflicted by a god they cannot defy or comprehend or even truly hate, because she is them. Does that not make them worthy of something? I asked, uncertain what I was even suggesting. Pity? Understanding? Perhaps, the Captain General said. But pity changes nothing. Understanding changes nothing. They are Xenos and they are damned, and we are humanity's guardians. We acknowledge their tragedy. We do not let it sway us. He was correct, of course. We are custodians. We see clearly. And what I saw clearly was that the Eldar were the authors of their own eternal damnation, architects of a fate more terrible than anything the Imperium could inflict upon them. But understanding the mechanisms of their curse raised other questions. Questions that gnawed at the edges of my thoughts during the long watches in the palace, during the centuries of guard duty and strategic planning and silent contemplation that fill a custodian's existence. Chief among them, could this happen to humanity? We are a psychic species, after all. Not as potent as the Eldar, not as inherently connected to the warp, but psychers arise among us in ever-increasing numbers. The Emperor himself is the greatest psychic entity in the galaxy, and he has been working for millennia to guide humanity's psychic evolution. What if we follow the Eldar's path? What if our own excess, our own sins, accumulate in the warp until they achieve critical mass and birth a new chaos god, one formed specifically from human vices, human desires, human capacity for corruption? Would that god claim us as Slaanesh claims the Eldar? Would every human soul become retroactively bound to this new entity, destined for torment beyond ending? It is, perhaps, the most terrifying possibility I have ever contemplated. And it is not theoretical. Chaos already claims human souls in uncounted trillions. The galaxy already groans beneath the weight of humanity's sins given form in the warp. We balance on a knife's edge. The Emperor maintains the astronomicon, guides our evolution, enforces the strictures that keep humanity from descending into the kind of excess that doomed the Eldar. But he is failing. The golden throne crumbles. The Imperium decays. And with every passing century, we slide closer to our own potential fall. Perhaps this is why the Emperor forbade worship of himself, why he proclaimed the imperial truth, denying the existence of gods even as he walked among us as the most divine being in human history. Perhaps he understood that belief, when it reaches critical mass, when it is held by quadrillions of minds across 1,000,000 worlds, becomes a force in the warp that can birth entities of terrible power. Perhaps he saw what happened to the Eldar and sought to prevent humanity from creating its own Slaanesh, a god of humanity's darkest impulses, waiting to be born from our accumulated sins. So he failed. The ecclesiarchy worships him as a god. Quadrillions of humans pray to the god emperor daily. Their faith, their devotion, their desperate need for divine protection, all of it bleeds into the warp, shaping the immaterium, creating something that may one day achieve independent consciousness. And if that day comes, will humanity's fate mirror the Eldar's? Will every human soul become fuel for an entity born from our own worst impulses? I do not know. I am custodian, not prophet. But I have walked the webway. I have fought demons in the halls beneath the palace. And I have seen enough of the warp's nature to understand that this is not merely possible but perhaps inevitable. Unless something changes. Unless humanity finds a way to transcend its current trajectory, to evolve beyond the psychological weaknesses that feed chaos, to achieve the psychic apotheosis the Emperor intended without birthing new horrors in the process. It is a narrow path, perhaps impossibly narrow. But then, the Eldar's path was always doomed because they pursued it alone, without constraint, without the kind of external discipline the Emperor seeks to impose on humanity's development. They had no God-Emperor to guide them, no custodians to guard against excess, no imperial truth to counter the lies of demons. They were brilliant and sophisticated and utterly free, and that freedom destroyed them. Humanity, for all our flaws, for all our brutality and ignorance, has shackles. The Emperor's vision, the Lex Imperialis, the constant warfare that prevents us from becoming complacent, from sinking into the kind of decadence that consumed the Eldar. Perhaps those shackles are what will save us. Perhaps the Imperium's grimness, its rejection of pleasure and comfort, its endless grinding necessity. Perhaps all of that is not merely circumstance but protection. A deliberate prevention of the conditions that might allow humanity to repeat the Eldar's fall. If so, then the Emperor's wisdom exceeds even what I had previously understood. He saw not merely what humanity could become, but what it must not become. And he built the Imperium not as an end goal but as a holding pattern, a civilization designed to maintain humanity in a state of controlled suffering that prevents the accumulation of excess that might doom us as it doomed the Eldar. It is a grim calculus. But then, we live in a grim galaxy. I have spoken with other custodians about this, quietly, in the secure chambers deep beneath the palace where even the most sophisticated surveillance cannot reach. We debate the nature of damnation, the mechanics of divine birth, the question of whether humanity's fate is sealed or still malleable. Shield Captain Valerian holds that humanity is fundamentally different from the Eldar, that our psychic potential, while growing, will never reach the concentration necessary to birth a new chaos god specifically attuned to human souls. He argues that the Emperor's careful management of our species, his genetic engineering and psychic guidance, has built in protections that the Eldar lacked. Custodian Amon disagrees. He has studied the Eldar more extensively than any of us, has accessed records sealed since the Age of Strife, has even spoken with Harlequins and learned some of their forbidden knowledge. He believes humanity is on the same path, merely a few thousand years behind, and that without radical intervention we will inevitably experience our own fall. Personally, I believe the truth lies between these positions. Humanity may birth a god, indeed, may already be birthing one through worship of the Emperor, but whether that entity becomes our Slaanesh or our salvation depends on variables we cannot yet predict. What remains certain is this: the Eldar's fate serves as a warning. They show us what happens when a psychic species pursues excess without restraint, when sophistication becomes decadence, when the pursuit of experience supersedes all other values. And they show us that damnation, once achieved, is eternal. There is no redemption for the Eldar. Slaanesh will never release them, never grow bored of their torment, never be satiated by their suffering. The Dark Prince is infinite, and her appetite is infinite, and every Eldar soul will feed that appetite across a time frame that makes the age of the universe seem like a single heartbeat. This is why the Craftworld Eldar fight with such desperation, why they cling to life with such fierce determination, why they are willing to sacrifice anything and anyone to preserve themselves for even one more day. Because they know, every one of them knows with absolute certainty, what awaits them at death. They do not merely fear oblivion. Oblivion would be mercy. They fear consciousness. They fear awareness. They fear remaining themselves intact and aware while experiencing torments specifically designed to exploit their every vulnerability across eternity. It is the most exquisite horror the galaxy has to offer, and it is entirely self-inflicted. The Eldar created Slaanesh. They birthed their own damnation. They fashioned the chains that now bind every member of their species across all of time. And they did it pursuing the very thing that still defines them, the pursuit of experience, of perfection, of transcendent achievement in every endeavor. Even now, even knowing what they know, the Craftworld Eldar cannot fully abandon that pursuit. They call it the Path, a disciplined system of psychological control that allows them to pursue excellence in specific domains without falling into the obsession that doomed their ancestors. But it is still the same fundamental drive. The same need to experience, to excel, to push boundaries. They have merely channeled it, focused it, built guardrails around it. They walk the edge of the same abyss that swallowed their empire, trusting their discipline to preserve them from falling. Most manage it. The path system works after a fashion. But there are always those who stray, who lose themselves in their chosen role, who fall from the path into obsession. And when they fall, Slaanesh is waiting. I witnessed it myself, during the defense of Craftworld Alatok against a Red Corsair's incursion. A guardian, a simple militia member, the equivalent of an Imperial Guardsman, had been fighting for 3 straight days without rest. His aspect warrior training had been decades ago, briefly walking the path of the warrior before moving on to other pursuits. But the exigencies of battle had awakened something in him, some dormant appetite for combat that had never fully quieted. As I fought beside the Eldar against the Chaos invaders, I watched this guardian begin to change. His movements became more fluid, more aggressive. He stopped taking cover, stopped following tactical doctrine, began seeking out the most dangerous enemies with a smile on his alien features that reminded me horribly of the berserkers of Khorne. An autarch noticed, tried to intervene, attempted to pull the guardian back from whatever psychological brink he approached. But it was too late. The guardian had fallen from the path. He had remembered the joy of battle, the ecstasy of violence, and in that remembering he had opened himself to the same impulses that doomed his ancestors. He died moments later, cut down by a Chaos Marine's bolter, and I watched, again, through the psychic resonance that filled the Wraithbone corridors, as his soul was claimed. This time I understood what I was seeing. Not a violent seizure but a welcoming. Not resistance but recognition. Slaanesh did not drag the soul into her realm. She opened her arms, and the soul came willingly, drawn by the promise of experiencing battle ecstasy forever, across eternity, refined and intensified beyond anything possible in mortal flesh. Only after it was too late, after the soul had fully entered Slaanesh's domain, did the truth become apparent. The ecstasy was there, yes, but so was the agony. The promise of infinite experience was fulfilled, but not in the way the fallen Eldar had imagined. Every sensation was amplified beyond endurance, beyond sanity, beyond anything resembling pleasure or pain as we understand those concepts. The autarch who had tried to save him collapsed, keening in psychic anguish at witnessing another of his people consigned to eternal torment. They always think it will be different for them, he told me later, his voice hollow with grief. They always believe they can control it, that their will is strong enough, that they can experience the intensity without losing themselves. And they are always wrong. Why? I asked. Why do they fall, knowing what awaits? Because we are still Eldar, he said simply. The same drives that built our empire, the same needs that birthed our damnation, those are not gone. They are merely suppressed. And suppression is not cure. The disease remains in our blood, in our souls, waiting for any moment of weakness to resurface. Then you are all damned, I said. If the impulse cannot be removed, only controlled, then eventually every one of you will fall. Yes, the autarch agreed. Given infinite time, every Eldar will eventually fail, will stray from the path, will fall to obsession, will open themselves to she who thirsts. It is why we fight so desperately for every year of survival. Not because we believe we can escape our fate, but because we can delay it. Every century we persist is another century we deny to her. It was the most hopeless philosophy I had ever encountered. An entire species living in the certain knowledge of inevitable damnation, fighting merely to postpone the inevitable, measuring victory in decades or centuries of delayed suffering rather than any genuine salvation. And yet, there was a terrible dignity in it. They did not surrender. They did not despair into inaction. They fought, planned, schemed, survived. Not because they believed in ultimate victory, but because the alternative was unthinkable. Perhaps there is a lesson there for humanity. Perhaps the point is not to believe in salvation but to refuse damnation for as long as possible. To fight against entropy, against chaos, against the dying of the light. Not because we will ultimately prevail but because the struggle itself has meaning. It is not a philosophy the Imperium teaches. We speak of the Emperor's ultimate victory, of humanity's manifest destiny, of the final triumph over Xenos and heretic and demon. We offer hope, however grim, however distant. But the Eldar know better. They have seen the end of their own story, and it is not triumph. It is eternal suffering. And still they persist. There is courage in that. The kind of courage that does not require hope, that does not depend on belief in eventual victory. The courage to continue despite certainty of doom. I am not certain humans are capable of such courage. We require our myths, our legends, our faith in the Emperor's protection and humanity's eventual ascendance. Strip those away, confront us with the absolute certainty of infinite torment, and most would break. But the Eldar do not break. They bend, they suffer, they endure tragedies that would shatter human minds. They watch their loved ones die knowing those souls are claimed by a god of infinite hunger. They walk paths of rigid discipline knowing one misstep means eternal damnation. They navigate a galaxy that hates them, surrounded by younger races who cannot comprehend their desperation. And they continue. I wonder, sometimes, if this is why the Emperor has not simply exterminated them. We have the power, certainly. The Imperium could commit sufficient resources to destroy every craft world, to hunt down every Exodite world, to collapse the webway and trap the Drukhari in their dark city until Slaanesh finally consumes them. But we do not. We fight them when our interests conflict, yes. We kill them when they threaten humanity, certainly. But we have never pursued their total extinction with the same fervor we direct against other Xenos threats. Perhaps the Emperor sees in them a reflection of humanity's potential future. A warning written in the fate of a dying species. This is what happens when psychic evolution outpaces wisdom. This is the price of excess. This is what you must avoid. Or perhaps, and this is heretical speculation I acknowledge, perhaps he pities them. Perhaps the Emperor, who has lived long enough to watch empires rise and fall, who has witnessed the birth of gods and the death of species, perhaps he alone can truly comprehend the magnitude of their tragedy. And in that comprehension, perhaps he allows them to continue their desperate struggle because extinguishing them would be a mercy, and mercy is a luxury the galaxy cannot afford. The universe is cruel. It is vast and dark and utterly indifferent to suffering. The warp reflects our emotions, births entities of malevolence from our sins, and offers damnation to any who falter. In such a universe, the Eldar's continued existence serves a purpose. They remind us that enlightenment is not protection, sophistication is not salvation, and even the mightiest can fall so far that eternity itself becomes insufficient to measure their suffering. They are a monument to hubris, and humanity must never forget what they teach. But understanding the metaphysics of Eldar damnation, the mechanisms by which Slaanesh claims their souls, the reasons why their torment is eternal and inescapable, this understanding raises a final, terrible question. Can they be saved? The obvious answer is no. Slaanesh is a chaos god, a fundamental force of the warp, an entity that exists across all time simultaneously. Even if every Eldar were somehow destroyed tomorrow, their souls already claimed at the moment of death, Slaanesh would continue to exist, continue to feed on those souls across eternity. The god does not require new victims to persist. She has sufficient Eldar souls already to sustain her divine consciousness forever. And yet, there are those among the Eldar who seek alternatives. The Inari, the followers of the nascent god of the dead, believe that by awakening Iniad they can challenge Slaanesh directly, perhaps even defeat her and free the Eldar souls she has consumed. It is a desperate gambit, opposed by many craft worlds who fear the cost of awakening a god of death might equal or exceed the torment of Slaanesh's hunger. The Harlequins serve Segarak, the laughing god, who mocks Slaanesh with clever stratagems and impossible schemes. They believe their god's humor and cunning can outwit the Dark Prince, can create conditions under which Eldar souls might escape her grasp. Even some Drukhari seek alternatives beyond their current path of sustained cruelty. There are rumors, unconfirmed but persistent, of homunculi who experiment with soul manipulation, seeking ways to alter Eldar essence to make it unpalatable to Slaanesh, or to shield it from her perception. All of these attempts share a common thread: desperation. The Eldar know they cannot simply defeat Slaanesh through force. She is a god, empowered by emotions that exist throughout the galaxy, sustained by the fundamental concept of excess itself. No army can kill her. No weapon can permanently harm her. She exists beyond the reach of conventional warfare. But perhaps she can be circumvented. Perhaps the chains that bind Eldar souls to her can be broken, not through force but through fundamental metaphysical change. Perhaps the Eldar can evolve into something she no longer recognizes as prey, can transform themselves so completely that her claim no longer applies. It would require nothing less than the complete transformation of the Eldar as a species. A second evolution, as profound as the first that made them the galaxy's preeminent psychic race. They would need to become something new, something that retains their essential identity while being fundamentally different from the beings who created Slaanesh. Is such transformation possible? I do not know. The metaphysical laws that govern the relationship between mortal souls and chaos gods are not fully understood even by the Emperor. The warp operates according to principles that defy conventional logic, where paradox and contradiction are fundamental rather than exceptional. But if anyone in the galaxy might achieve such transformation, it would be the Eldar. They are the same species that built an empire spanning millions of worlds, that defeated the Necrons at the height of their power, that created technologies we can barely comprehend. They are a race defined by ambition and capability, by the pursuit of perfection in all endeavors. If they could channel that drive, that same obsessive excellence that doomed them, toward the goal of metaphysical transformation, toward becoming something new that Slaanesh cannot claim, then perhaps their story does not end in eternal torment. Perhaps there is a slim, infinitesimally narrow path to something resembling salvation. But it would require sacrifices beyond imagining. It would require unity among craft worlds who have been divided for 10,000 years. It would require cooperation between the craftworld Eldar, the Drukhari, the Exodites, the Harlequins, the Inari factions that despise each other, that represent fundamentally different responses to the fall. It would require them to trust each other despite millennia of betrayal and conflicting philosophies. And most impossibly, it would require time. Time to research, to experiment, to pursue this transformation while maintaining their desperate struggle for survival against all the galaxy's threats. Time is what the Eldar have least of all. Every year, their numbers dwindle. Every century, another craft world falls to external threats or internal despair. The Drukhari of Kamarak balance on the edge of extinction, their dark city constantly threatened by demonic incursions and internal strife. The Exodites persist on their primitive worlds, but they are scattered, isolated, disconnected from the greater Eldar consciousness. The species that once ruled the galaxy now counts its total population in billions rather than trillions. They are a dying race, fragmenting further with each passing generation, and the dream of unity necessary for their transformation grows more impossible with every loss. Perhaps this too is Slaanesh's design. The god is patient. What is 10,000 years to an eternal being? And by keeping the Eldar desperate, divided, constantly struggling for survival, she ensures they can never unite sufficiently to threaten her dominion over their souls. It is a perfect trap. The very conditions that might allow escape, unity, time, focused effort, are prevented by the necessity of survival. The Eldar cannot pursue transformation because they must focus on immediate threats. They cannot unify because their different factions have developed incompatible survival strategies. They cannot afford the luxury of long-term research because death comes for them constantly, in 1,000 different forms. And all the while, with every Eldar who dies, another soul is claimed by she who thirsts. Another consciousness begins its eternal torment. Another fragment of psychic essence returns to feed the god who was born from their ancestors' sins. It is elegant in its horror. Slaanesh need not actively hunt the Eldar. She need only wait. Time itself is her ally. Eventually, every Eldar will die. Eventually, every soul will come to her. And in the meantime, the Eldar's desperate struggle for survival generates the very emotions: fear, despair, obsession, excess, that feed her divine power. The prey sustains the predator even in fleeing. The victims empower their tormentor even in resistance. It is a closed loop of damnation from which there is no escape because every action taken to avoid the trap merely reinforces it. Unless they stop struggling, unless they find peace with their fate, unless they accept damnation and in accepting it transcend it somehow. But that is not the Eldar way. They are defined by their refusal to surrender, their determination to survive despite impossible odds. Acceptance is antithetical to their nature. They will fight until the last of them dies, until the final soul is claimed, until Slaanesh has consumed every fragment of their once mighty species. And then she will digest them across eternity, experiencing every possible permutation of their suffering, extracting every conceivable sensation from their eternal torment. It is the most comprehensive damnation imaginable. Temporal, metaphysical, psychological, spiritual, the Eldar are damned in every dimension of existence simultaneously. Their past condemned them, their present traps them, their future offers only infinite variations of torment. And yet they persist. Every craftworld Eldar who walks the path, who struggles to maintain discipline, who fights to survive another day, they are all engaged in an act of defiance against their ordained fate. Every Drukhari who tortures another victim to stave off their own damnation is participating in a desperate rejection of cosmic justice. Every Harlequin who performs the dance of death is thumbing their nose at she who thirsts, mocking her with artistic brilliance that she can observe but cannot fully claim. They are all damned, but they refuse to submit to their damnation. And in that refusal there is something almost admirable. I say this as a custodian, as one who has fought the Eldar, who has killed them when necessary, who serves humanity's interests above all others. I am not sympathetic to their cause. I do not advocate for their salvation. I acknowledge their crimes, both those of the ancient empire that birthed Slaanesh and those of the modern factions who sacrifice human lives without hesitation in pursuit of their own survival. But I also acknowledge that their situation represents a form of injustice that transcends conventional morality. Most of the Eldar now living had no part in the fall. They were born into a cursed species, inheriting damnation from ancestors who died millennia before their birth. They are punished for sins they did not commit, sentenced to eternal torment for crimes they had no part in. There is no justice in that. Only cosmic indifference dressed in divine purpose. The warp does not care about individual guilt or innocence. Slaanesh claims Eldar souls not because each individual deserves eternal torment, but because they are metaphysically bound to her by the circumstances of their birth. A newborn Eldar, innocent of any crime, is still destined for she who thirsts. There is no escape through virtue, no salvation through righteousness. Being Eldar is itself the crime, and the sentence is infinite suffering. From a human perspective, this should be reassuring. The Xenos who threaten our species, who commit atrocities against our worlds, who manipulate and betray us in pursuit of their own survival, they are already condemned to a fate worse than anything we could inflict. Their damnation is assured. Justice, of a sort, will be served when they die and face what awaits them in Slaanesh's realm. But I find no reassurance in this, because the same metaphysical principles that damn the Eldar could one day damn humanity. The same warp mechanics that allow a god to claim an entire species as rightful prey could operate on us if we birth our own species-specific chaos entity. And we are moving in that direction. The Emperor's divinity is no longer merely a matter of ecclesiarchy dogma. There are genuine metaphysical changes occurring in the warp, gathering around the concept of the God Emperor, fed by quadrillions of prayers and an ocean of faith. If that entity achieves full awakening, if the nascent God consciousness that bears the Emperor's name becomes self-aware and autonomous, what will happen to humanity? Will we become bound to it as the Eldar are bound to Slaanesh? Will every human soul belong to the God Emperor by metaphysical right, claimed at death not by choice but by species-wide obligation? And if so, what happens if that entity becomes corrupted? What if the God Emperor of the warp, the gestalt of humanity's faith, is not truly the Emperor we serve but something else, something born from humanity's fears and hatreds, from our xenophobia and brutality, from our capacity for atrocity committed in righteousness? What if we birth our own Slaanesh and call it the God Emperor? These are not questions I can answer. They are perhaps not questions that have answers. But they haunt me, as I stand guard in the palace, as I watch the Imperium decay, as I observe humanity's psychic evolution accelerating beyond the Emperor's carefully planned trajectory. We are becoming something new, and history has shown that when a psychic species transforms without wisdom, when evolution outpaces understanding, the result is not transcendence but damnation. The Eldar are our warning. Their fate is our cautionary tale, and we must heed it. But will we? Can we? Or are we already too far along the path they walked? Our own fall written in the warp's memory, inevitable and inescapable? I do not know. I am custodian, I guard the Emperor and serve his vision. I execute the duties assigned to me with perfect precision and unwavering loyalty. But I am not blind. I see the cracks forming. I perceive the strain in the foundations. I understand that the Imperium as it exists cannot persist indefinitely, and what comes after may be worse than what we have now. Perhaps the Emperor understands this too. Perhaps his endless suffering on the Golden Throne is not merely maintaining the Astronomicon but holding back something far more terrible, the birth of a human chaos god that would doom our species as thoroughly as Slaanesh doomed the Eldar. If so, then his sacrifice is even greater than the Imperium teaches. He does not merely light the way for humanity's ships. He does not merely empower the Astronomicon and hold the webway breach at bay. He restrains our damnation. He delays our fall. He uses his incomprehensible will to prevent the accumulated weight of human sin from achieving the critical mass necessary to birth a new chaos god. And when he fails, when the Golden Throne finally collapses, when his will can no longer hold back the inevitable, humanity will learn what the Eldar learned 10,000 years ago. That enlightenment is not protection. That power is not security. That even the mightiest civilizations can fall so far that eternity becomes their prison. But that is speculation. Fearful prophecy born from observing the Eldar's fate and extrapolating to our own. It may be true. It may be paranoid fantasy. I cannot know, and neither can anyone else in the Imperium, save perhaps the Emperor himself. What I know for certain is this. The Eldar who fall to Slaanesh suffer eternal torment because they are claimed by a god they themselves created. Because their souls are formed from the same psychic essence as Slaanesh herself. Because the relationship between Eldar and Dark Prince is not predator and prey but creator and creation, source and apotheosis, parent and child. Slaanesh is what the Eldar became when their collective soul achieved godhood in the warp. And because of that fundamental identity, every Eldar soul belongs to her not by conquest but by origin. The torment is eternal because Eldar souls are too complex to dissolve, too psychically potent to lose consciousness even under infinite suffering. They remain aware across eons of carefully crafted torture, each experience designed to generate maximum sensation, all of it feeding back into Slaanesh who experiences their torment as her own pleasure. There is no escape because the chains are metaphysical rather than physical. No rescue is possible because entering Slaanesh's realm to retrieve a soul would require power equivalent to a chaos god, and no such power exists in the galaxy that does not also serve chaos in some fashion. The Eldar cannot be saved. They can only be delayed. Every moment of mortal existence is a victory against inevitable damnation. Every decade of survival is a triumph. Every century is a monument to their desperate defiance. And eventually they will all fall. Every last one of them will die, will be claimed, will begin their eternal suffering. The species that once ruled the galaxy will be reduced to nothing but fuel for a god they created in a moment of transcendent sin. It is the most complete damnation imaginable. And it is entirely deserved, not by the individuals who suffer it, but by the species as a whole. The Eldar Empire committed sins so profound they scarred reality itself. They birthed a chaos god through pure excess. They demonstrated that a species, given sufficient power and insufficient wisdom, will inevitably destroy itself in the most horrific manner possible. And now they pay the price. Not just the generation that committed the sins, but every generation thereafter across all of time. The innocent and the guilty alike, bound together by the accident of their species, all condemned to the same fate. It is unjust. But the universe is not just. The warp does not recognize individual morality. Chaos does not reward virtue or punish vice according to human, or even Eldar, standards. It simply is vast and terrible and utterly indifferent to suffering. And in the face of such cosmic indifference, the Eldar's continued struggle becomes almost heroic. They know they cannot win. They know salvation is impossible. They know every last one of them is already damned. And still they fight. Still they scheme and sacrifice and persist. Still they walk their paths with rigid discipline, knowing one misstep means eternal torment. Still the Drukhari torture innocents by the billions to delay their own damnation by a few years. Still the Harlequins dance and laugh in mockery of she who thirsts. They refuse to go quietly into damnation, They refuse to accept their fate with dignity. They rage against it, struggle against it, defy it with every breath and every action. Perhaps that is all mortal beings can do when faced with cosmic injustice, refuse to cooperate with our own destruction. Fight even knowing we will lose. Persist even without hope. Struggle even when the struggle itself empowers our enemies. Because the alternative is surrender. And surrender is the one thing the Eldar, for all their faults and crimes, have never done. I have witnessed their damnation. I have seen how Slaanesh claims them, how their souls are drawn irresistibly into her realm, how the torment begins in the instant of death and continues across eternity. I have spoken with Eldar who understand their fate with absolute clarity, who know precisely what awaits them, and who still choose to live another day. There is a lesson in that. Not one the Imperium teaches, not one I can officially endorse, but a lesson nonetheless, that perhaps meaning exists not in escaping damnation, but in refusing it for as long as possible. That perhaps victory is measured not in ultimate triumph but in continued defiance. That perhaps the point of existence is not to achieve some final salvation but to fight against entropy and chaos and the dying of the light, even knowing the fight is ultimately futile. The Eldar are damned. Completely, utterly, eternally damned. There is no hope for them, no salvation, no eventual triumph. Only delay. Only the desperate struggle to live another day, to experience another moment of existence before the inevitable claim comes. And in that struggle, in that refusal to surrender, in that determination to extract every possible instant of mortal existence from a universe that has already condemned them, in that, there is something worth remembering. Not sympathy, not alliance, not forgiveness for their crimes against humanity, but recognition that we face the same fundamental challenge they face. That we, too, exist in a universe that offers damnation more readily than salvation. That we, too, struggle against forces that may ultimately prove irresistible. That we, too, may one day find ourselves facing eternal torment, knowing our fate is sealed, wondering if the struggle was worthwhile. And when that day comes, if it comes, we would do well to remember the Eldar's example. Not their fall, not their sins, not the arrogance and excess that doomed them, but their refusal, even in the face of absolute damnation, to stop fighting. That is why Eldar who fall to Slaanesh suffer eternal torment. Because they created a god in their own image, a being of infinite appetite and zero restraint, who claims them not as prey but as rightful possession. And that is why, despite knowing their fate, they continue to resist. Because resistance is all they have left. All any of us have left, perhaps, in this galaxy of eternal war. I stand now in the Hall of Victories, deep within the Imperial Palace, surrounded by monuments to humanity's triumphs across 10,000 years. Battle standards hang from the vaulted ceiling. Statues of heroes line the walls. The names of martyrs are inscribed in gold on eternal plaques. It is a hall dedicated to hope, to the promise that our struggles have meaning, that our sacrifices serve a greater purpose, that the Emperor's vision will ultimately prevail. But I have seen the Eldar's fate, and I wonder. They, too, once built monuments to their victories. They, too, believed their empire would last forever. They, too, thought themselves beyond the reach of consequence. And then they birthed their own damnation, and everything they had built became ashes and memory. Could it happen to us? Are we merely the Eldar at an earlier stage of development, confidently marching toward the same abyss they fell into? The question haunts me, and it has no answer. But I know this: the Eldar's eternal torment serves a purpose beyond their own suffering. It serves as a cosmic monument to hubris, a warning written in the screaming of damned souls across eternity. This is what happens when power exceeds wisdom. This is the price of excess. This is what awaits those who believe themselves above natural law. And if humanity is wise, if the Emperor's guidance proves sufficient, if the Imperium's brutal discipline serves its purpose, we will heed that warning. We will look upon the Eldar's fate and see our own potential future. We will recognize that sophistication without restraint leads to damnation. We will understand that psychic evolution must be carefully managed, channeled, controlled, or it will destroy us as surely as it destroyed the species that once ruled the stars. The Eldar fall to Slaanesh and suffer eternal torment because they are bound to her by chains of metaphysical origin. Because they are made of the same substance as their god. Because in a very real sense, they are not separate from Slaanesh but fragments of her divine consciousness, experiencing mortal existence before being reabsorbed into her eternal awareness. It is the most intimate form of damnation imaginable. Not destruction by an external force, but reclamation by an internal one. Not punishment for sins, but return to source. Not even really death, but transformation into suffering made eternal. And there is no escape, no salvation, no hope of eventual mercy or redemption. Only the certainty that every Eldar, regardless of virtue or vice, will eventually be claimed and consumed across a time frame that makes geological ages seem brief. They know this. Every one of them knows this. And they persist anyway. Perhaps that is the final lesson. That meaning exists not in avoiding damnation, which may be impossible, but in how we face it. That the struggle itself has value, even if the outcome is predetermined. That defiance in the face of cosmic injustice is its own form of victory. I am custodian. I serve the Emperor and guard his vision. I have witnessed the Eldar's eternal torment, have understood its mechanisms, have comprehended its inevitability, and I will ensure humanity does not follow their path. Not because I believe we are superior, power does not confer virtue. Not because I think humanity incapable of the same sins, we have proven our capacity for atrocity too many times, but because I have seen what awaits at the end of that path, and I will do everything in my power to steer humanity away from it. The Eldar created Slaanesh and doomed themselves to eternal suffering. They are a cautionary tale written in the fundamental structure of the warp, a warning that will persist as long as chaos exists. And I will remember. I will bear witness. I will ensure their fate is not forgotten, not dismissed, not ignored. Because in this galaxy of endless night, where hope is scarce and damnation common, the greatest wisdom is learning from the mistakes of those who fell before us. The Eldar fell. They suffer eternally. And they show us, all of us, human and Xenos alike, what happens when ambition exceeds wisdom, when power outpaces restraint, when a species reaches for divinity without understanding the price. They are damned. But in their damnation, they serve a purpose. They remind us that even the mighty can fall, that even eternity can become a prison, that even gods can be born from sin, and that the only defense against such fate is eternal vigilance, unwavering discipline, and the wisdom to recognize that some paths, however tempting, lead only to damnation. This is why the Eldar who fall to Slaanesh suffer eternal torment. Not as punishment, not as justice, not even as consequence, but as inevitability, the return of fragments to their source, the reclamation of souls by a god they created, the completion of a cycle that began in excess and ends in infinite suffering. They are claimed because they belong to her. They suffer because she treasures them. They endure across eternity because their psychic sophistication will not permit them the mercy of oblivion. It is the most complete damnation the galaxy has to offer, and it serves as warning to every species, every civilization, every being that reaches for power without wisdom. This is what awaits those who birth their own gods. Remember, learn, do not repeat their mistake, or suffer as they suffer, across all of eternity, in the embrace of divinity gone mad. The Eldar scream in Slaanesh's realm. They will scream forever, and their screams echo through the warp as warning to all who would listen. I have heard those screams. I have witnessed their damnation. I have understood its mechanisms. And I will ensure humanity remembers. This is my duty, my purpose, my eternal vigilance, so that we do not join them in the darkness, so that humanity's fate, whatever it may be, is not the same as theirs, so that when our time comes, if it comes, we face it with wisdom rather than hubris, with preparation rather than ignorance. The Eldar fall to Slaanesh and suffer eternal torment because they created her from their own sins, and now she reclaims what has always been hers. May humanity never birth such a god. May we never know such damnation. May we learn from their example and choose a different path. This is my testimony, my witness, my warning across the ages. Remember the Eldar's fate, and never, ever repeat their mistakes.